I've been asked to introduce Mr. Hina. I'm not quite sure why, except that perhaps it's because I am an ex-bureaucrat, having served in one of the federal agencies for some 7 years, and I don't know if Mr. Hina wants to be referred to a bureaucrat, but generally anyone so employed by a federal establishment has to be so classified as a bureaucrat, so I'll take that liberty. In introducing him, before I go through his formal vita, which I will read to you, I will mention first that before working with this particular panel, and I'll admit my work has not been too great relative to the planning of this, I had very little knowledge of Indian affairs. However, I am very much interested in and teach courses in public administration and bureaucracy. And so as I have listened to the presentation so far, have seen the kinds of problems that the bureaucracy is faced. For example, my only observation relative to the Indian problem in bureaucracy relates to the White Earth Indian Reservation up in Minnesota, when the FHA wanted to build some new homes for the Indians who at that time were living in tar paper shacks and converted railroad cars and so on. And a friend of mine was on the council, and the question arose as to what kind of housing should they have. And of course you want the best, and so FHA looked at its records and found, well, the average size of the Indian family in the White Earth Indian Reservation was such that given so many square feet per child or per member of the family, you'd have to build such and such a home. It turned out to be a $22,000 or $23,000 home for people who had been living in tar paper shacks and converted railroad cars. And because of the resistance to this kind of thing by the Indian community itself, the need for housing, but the resistance to this kind of exorbitant expenditure, efforts were made to reduce this. The Indian leadership had to go into Washington, confer with FHA, and fight long and hard to get this reduced to some kind of a moderate program fulfilling the kinds of needs that the Indians in that particular reservation had. The point is, of course, you have a monolithic structure of government with some kinds of rules of organization which it tends to follow, and because of this, it cannot meet easily the individual needs of communities. And as I've observed the Indian communities, there obviously are a lot of them with the diverse values, diverse concepts of what should be, diverse ideas on what government should do or not do for them. And because of this, the bureaucrat coming out of Indian affairs or any other bureaucracy dealing with particular clienteles is going to have trouble. So let's try to view Mr. Hina's presentation in this light. Now for his formal vita. Mr. Hina is 40, a full-blood Indian of the Pueblo Zuni descent. He is well-versed in Indian community, education, employment, and government programs. And while at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, will pay special attention to equal employment opportunity programs. His previous experiences qualify him well and includes his most recent past as Director of Development for the Navajo Community College, and prior to that, Executive Director of Indian Community Action Programs and Program Specialist for the EDA, Department of Commerce. Mr. Hina has served as Lieutenant Governor for 3 years and Governor for 2 years of the Tasuki Pueblo, and he is active in the National Congress of American Indians, has participated in several community action programs, and belongs to numerous other Indian organizations and committees. In 1963, he was awarded the New Mexico Jaycees Outstanding Young Man and the New Mexico Award of New Mexico and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Distinguished Service Award. He has attended New Mexico College of Commerce, Haskell Institute, and the College of Santa Fe. Mr. Hina, as a former bureaucrat to a current one, welcome to Iowa State.
Thank you. I hope I can live up to all the things that were said of me. Hello. Not knowing to what extent the students, faculty, and so forth wanted to hear about the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I came here unprepared and was hoping to get some ideas from students, faculty members, and so forth about what to talk about. After spending some time here on the campus, I decided that in order to give a clear view of the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it was going to take like maybe about 50 sessions of this type, and knowing that many of you, perhaps for the first time, will be hearing about the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, about the kinds of conditions that are predominant on Indian reservations throughout the country, it's going to be very difficult to take in all at one setting all of the complexities involved in the so-called Indian problem. I would like to say that my feeling with regard to the Indian problem is this, that the American Indian, as described by federal people in terms of the Indian problem, is, I don't see it in my mind as an Indian problem. I see it as a human problem in which American Indians are involved. With that, I'd like to proceed with the short presentation I've prepared for this afternoon, and afterwards I'll ask Mr. Gigama, who is up here on the stage with me, to assist me in answering any questions that you may have. I'd like to begin by describing the historical background as far as the Bureau of Indian Affairs is concerned. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was first created in the War Department back in 1824. Now, those of you who are students of history, I don't think need to be told that the reason for establishing the Indian service in the War Department was because in those days the United States government was waging war against the native people of this continent. As a result of the various wars and so forth, there were treaties signed by Indian tribes with the United States government. In those treaties, lands were set aside for the exclusive use and ownership by Indians in wherever these areas were designated. This was the establishment of the Indian Reservation, or the restricted lands, which many people today talk about. In many of these treaties, there was also extensive language dealing with the protection and the promotion of the welfare of the citizens of those reservations. This was a responsibility that the United States government assumed as a result of the Indian tribes giving up certain realty or real estate for these kinds of services. Well, in 1849, the Indian office was transferred to the Department of Interior, where it is now located. I believe that it was transferred to the Department of Interior after the cessation of the Indian Wars, primarily to begin to provide the kinds of services and the kinds of protection of the lands that were necessary in those days in order for the United States government to live up to its commitment as far as the treaties and other agreements were concerned. I believe it was about that time that the guardian-ward relationship started. The assumption, and I'm sure it was a correct one, was that the Indian, during those early days, was not acquainted with the language of the dominant culture. They weren't wise about the ways of the dominant culture and all of these kinds of things. Therefore, the people on the part of the United States government who were brought in to protect and to provide the kinds of services that the government had agreed to assumed the guardian role, assumed that they were dealing with a group of people who were like children and who were not really qualified to manage their own affairs. So the paternalistic attitude developed as a result of that. And through the years, this paternalism has been reestablishing itself year after year after year. It's been slowly changing. We might also throw in here that there were many good things that were done in the minds of many people in this country with regard to the Indians, especially one which they thought was going to resolve the then Indian problems of those days. I believe it was in 1870 that the General Allotment Act was passed. Basically, this act was to provide a means for Indians to assume responsibility in their rightful place as citizens of this country by having them sign a certificate that said something like the individual signing this certificate was qualified to manage his own affairs. When this happened, the government designated 160 acres for his exclusive use and ownership. So here, an Indian was able to sign on a piece of paper, whether he could write in English or not. He was able to sign, he was given 160 acres, and that was his. It no longer belonged to the tribe, it no longer had the protection of the United States government. Well, once the Indians moved out on these small 160-acre lots, they learned that because they were not qualified in certain skills in order to get and retain jobs and be able to afford to pay taxes on these properties, they began to lose out. And as a result, non-Indians bought these lands out from under Indian ownership. And this is where much of the real estate, as far as Indian ownership was concerned, changed hands, so that today there is only about 50 million acres of land that is still within the ownership of Indian tribes, whether they be under the Allotment Act or under the Restricted Status Act under which most reservations come. But through the years, the Indians have become acceptable to the changes in their own attitudes. They've been more receptive to gaining and acquiring an education, not only in the elementary grades, but in the high schools and so on into college. So that today we have many Indians throughout the country who are educated, who have degrees from various universities and colleges, who are advocating the involvement of Indians in the decision-making process of the BIA. But I think the things that we have been hearing most recently have been said by many of us in the years past. At that time, it wasn't customary for Indians to get up before a large audience and say the things that are being said today, but it was done as many as 10, 12 years ago by a number of us throughout the country. We were saying some of the same things that are being said today, and I think gradually the attitude within government began to change. They began to become noticeable, at least, to the result that they were running into. I think many of us who were born and live, like myself, I still live on a reservation, we come to the system. We are the result of the education that the Bureau provided for our reservations. And it's rather sad for me to listen to people who are now realizing that there are Indians that are qualified, that can assume some of these responsible positions. The only thing that they see is that Indians are coming on board and they're going to replace non-Indians. They don't see it as a result of their effectiveness in the training programs, in the education programs, that because of their effectiveness, Indians have learned and are now acquiring responsible positions in government and various other places. It's rather sad, but that's the way it is. I think especially within the last 2 to 3 years, there has been a lot of talk about more involvement on the part of Indians in the decision-making process. And this is not only true within the BIA, this is true within our universities. We hear students wanting to be involved in the decision-making process as far as administration of universities and colleges are concerned. Also with regard to national government policies and so forth. People are wanting to be involved. So this is not, in my opinion, anything different. What is happening within the BIA is no different from what is happening generally in the whole of society here in America. This is largely the historical part of the BIA. They're responsible primarily because the government agreed to provide certain things. They agreed to protect the lands and so forth, and this is why the BIA is there. Now, as late as July 8, 1970, President Nixon came out with what he called a message on Indian affairs. In that message, he emphasized that there was a need for the involvement of Indians in the self-determination of their destinies without the threat of termination. Now, what do we mean by termination? To an Indian, termination means that the government, the Congress in this case, can arbitrarily decide that they have lived up to their commitments, to their agreements as a result of the treaties and so forth. The Indian people do not feel that this should be or can be an arbitrary decision. They feel that if any termination of federal services, federal protection is concerned, they need to be consulted and they need to have an input into why the government can remove itself from assisting Indians throughout the country. Another point that the President talked about was the establishment of an Indian Trust Council. This would largely be a legal department within the Bureau of Indian Affairs, wherein the Bureau of Indian Affairs, with this legal office, could then advocate and also represent in the various courts Indian interest in these courts, so that protection is continued in terms of litigating, adjudicating tribal rights to minerals and trespass rights and so forth. The President also talked about improving the economy on the reservations. In talking about these kinds of things, the Congress appropriated a few additional dollars during the last fiscal year, and the Commissioner of Indian Affairs established what we call an Indian Development Fund. This fund was set up, it was distributed to the field agencies closest to the reservations, guidelines were established. The basis for doing this is to allow Indians to become owners of businesses right on the reservation. Today, when you visit a reservation, almost all, I would say 99% of businesses located on Indian reservations are owned by non-Indians. And the move towards getting more money is to allow the Indian to borrow from this fund so that he can establish himself in business, so that the economy on the reservation improves. One of the things that the President did was to support the return of Blue Lake to the Taos Pueblo Indians. This was recently enacted. The President signed this thing into law. The Taos Pueblo Indians now have returned to them 48,000 acres, which will be maintained by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I think in line with some of the things that the President spelled out in his special message to Congress, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Mr. Lewis Bruce, announced on November 27th 4 new major policies that will govern the activities of the Bureau of Indian Affairs at least during his administration, and hopefully during the rest of the existence of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. These areas are in dealing with the redelegation of the Commissioner's authority to the field offices. Presently, within the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we have an organizational structure whereby there is a central office in Washington. There are area offices, 11 of them located in strategic areas throughout the country. These people have line authority. Then from there on, you go down to the field offices. The field offices are the offices that deal directly with Indian tribes. Anytime a request is made by an Indian tribe for certain kinds of programs or projects, it has to be reviewed at the agency level. From there on, it's sent up to the area level where it's again appealed, and then from there on up to the central office. Well, what the attempt now is to remove the second layer of authority and make those offices into technical assistance service centers. Will largely be staffed by the same people, but they will play primarily a technician or expertise role in terms of assisting Indian tribes and the field agencies closest to the reservation. A new policy is with regard to reassignment of administrative and management personnel. We must realize that the employees who are employed within the Bureau of Indian Affairs are civil service employees. And I think most of us know that civil service employees do have certain protection. And because of this, and because it is a federal operation, Indians have not been allowed to sit in on the discussions or evaluations in terms of hiring people for filling certain vacancies. The reassignment policy will, as much as possible, allow for this. For instance, the key administrator at the field office is the superintendent. Well, up until recently, no Indian tribe has ever been given the opportunity to review the qualification records of an individual trying to obtain that position. But now they can do this. They can review the qualifications of a civil servant in the BIA, and if they feel that they have a member of their tribe or they know someone whom they feel can qualify under the civil service requirements for these kinds of positions, they have the option to nominate their own candidates. And once this is done, people from the Washington level will come out and negotiate with whatever tribe is doing this and hopefully come to a just solution of the problem. But I think presently the commissioner feels that he is going to go with the recommendations of the tribes who make nominations for candidates in these key positions. Another change is in establishing a new system for contracting with Indian tribes. One of the greatest needs among Indians is to get them to experience the responsibilities of managing and administering programs. And through the vehicle of contracting, the option is provided to Indian tribes to contract some of the services that the Bureau of Indian Affairs now performs. For instance, say X reservation feels that they have among their own people qualified people that could fit into the administrative positions, into the clerical positions, and so forth. And they come into the Bureau and they say, we want to contract this whole agency. This would mean then that the Bureau would contract with that tribe, and the funds that were initially provided to the BIA, which the BIA expended to operate that agency, would then be turned over to the tribe. They would then hire their own people. Now, in many cases, they could be the same people that are employed now, but it is hoped that Indian tribes will recognize that they do have these kinds of responsibilities and will be able to make determinations on the basis of professional qualifications and so forth, job skills, and not in terms of personalities. You know, he's a good friend of mine, therefore I want to give him a job. But this is the avenue that is now open to Indian tribes, which they haven't had. We might say that there is some reluctance on the part of Indian tribes to accept this new arrangement because they see it as a disguise towards termination. Again, we use the word termination very advisedly because termination is a very strong scare word as far as Indians are concerned. And I think we need to define what we mean by termination. I think, you know, in my own mind, termination to me means that the Congress is the only body that can terminate the agreement as far as the treaty and so forth is concerned, or the restricted status of Indian lands as it affects them in terms of termination. These are the kinds of protection that the United States government agreed to, and I think Indian tribes are going to hold them to it for as long as possible. On the other hand, there are services. And I can see that as Indians become better educated and so forth, they begin to move into the competitive society and begin to take on jobs. They have incomes and so forth, and they begin to operate just like any other citizen in this country. And at some point in time, I can't predict when, the service end of the government's performance is going to live out its usefulness. And perhaps at that time, termination on the part of services may transpire. I don't expect to see it in my lifetime. But I think we need to really define, what we mean by termination. Another important policy is a policy of evaluation and inspection. Here again, this will involve the Indians. And what will happen there is that Bureau officials and Indian officials will sit in and evaluate and inspect the operation of a field office in terms of the effectiveness of the key administrators, whether or not services are being brought to the field so that Indian people that need them are benefiting, and so forth. And also, Indian tribes will be able to look over the shoulders of federal employees and check them in terms of, well, we don't think you should be doing that. And so I think these 4 policies which the Commissioner recently announced are very good policies in terms of establishing or creating a mechanism by which Indian people are going to become involved if they want to. Now, we hear a lot of talk about we want Indians involved in the decision-making process, but there are a lot of Indians out there that aren't quite prepared for that. And so I think when we talk about involvement, we have to qualify exactly whom do we mean. Do we mean the urban Indian or do we mean the reservation Indian? But I think as far as we are concerned, as far as 1970 and 71 is concerned, the name of the game is going to be involvement. We are going to try to interest Indian tribes in becoming more involved in the daily decision-making that takes place at the field level and at the central level. We're going to try to change the Bureau's image from a management agency to a service agency. And we expect to play the role of a catalyst and an advocate as far as changes in legislation, changes in regulations are concerned, which would make the Bureau a more responsive agency rather than one that is restricted because of federal regulations, congressional acts, and so forth. I think we need to point out that I've hit on it a number of times, but again, I think we're talking about attitudes of people. We have about 15,000 employees in the Bureau. Some of these people have been in there 10, 20, 15, 30 years, and they're working towards retirement. Mr. Gigamal and myself, I think between us, we have 4 months in the Bureau, and we're not really looking forward to retirement from the Bureau. But I think we're looking for change. We're looking for the kinds of changes that will allow Indian people to become involved. Among the Indians, there's also the attitude of, well, the government is moving in that direction. They want us more involved. And by showing that we can do those things means that they're thinking about terminating us. There's a historical distrust on the part of Indians of the non-Indian. Look what happened to us, and all of these kinds of things. These are built-in problems when you're talking about tremendous changes. But I think much needs to be done. The education level on the average of American Indians is 5 years. The life expectancy level is the average of 44 years. The housing among Indian reservations is about 75% in need of repair. Unemployment runs as high as 40% on some reservations. Reservation development, the development of the economy on reservations is almost non-existent. And so I say much needs to be done, but it can't be done by the government alone. It has to be done in partnership with the Indians. And if the Indian people see the new policies as the mechanism which will allow them to be involved, I think we're going to see some tremendous changes over the next few years. I think one of the most important things that I would like to see as a result of the new policies is to be able to establish a National Indian Advisory Council at the Washington level composed of elected officials from among tribal leaders to represent Indian interests at the national level. I see this advisory council as a council which can address itself to enacting new regulations, new laws, and changing the old ones that inhibit the BIA and the federal government. And to be effective, because the BIA is a federal organization, an arm of government, there needs to be these kinds of changes before real effective change can take place. Maybe we want to ask Mr. Gigamon to...
I don't know how my name got mixed up. I was supposed to send in a VEDA, and some people in our office in Washington didn't do it. It's a BIA mistake. My name is Hene Gigamon. I'm a Kiowa from Oklahoma, and I'm 24 years old, and I graduated from the University of Oklahoma School of Journalism, and I raised hell for 4 years, I think, as a member of the National Indian Youth Council. And I've picketed BIA facilities all over the country and have written scourging editorials against the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. I'm a sort of a would-be playwright, and one of my plays is called The Trial of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. And you can just imagine that I still have that play, and I still intend to hopefully get it produced someday in New York. But I am only at the Bureau since the 1st of November, and my job is basically public relations. Now, I know that would bring a laugh from people who have certain ideas about the Bureau of Indian Affairs, public relations, and the BIA. Well, I got into this situation because they found out that I was a young Indian journalist in Washington, and that I had worked on several newspapers, and I had written quite a few things about Indians, and also that I was an activist, and that I had written some very powerful editorials against the Bureau, none of which, by the way, had any effect. And not really, no effect at all, zero. So this was very frustrating to me, and if I can pull this down. And I got the idea, so many people were telling me,
I got the idea, so many people were telling me the only way that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is ever going to be changed, and some of my fellow activists were telling me the same thing, the only way that we're ever going to be able to change the goddamn Bureau of Indian Affairs is to do it from within. And that never really did sink into my head. I always thought, I was so bitterly anti-BIA, or I thought I was, I felt that I was. That just any mention of association with BIA was such an opprobrious thought that I just didn't even want to think about. It was silly. But I gradually began to see the futility of my efforts in raising hell on the activist side. And I think a lot of other people have, on various activist organizations have done the same. I don't think that Abbie Hoffman will be the same person a year from now. I don't think he's the same person he was last year. Where is Abbie right now? It's a good question if you think about it. But anyway, I started thinking about this, changing the Bureau from within. So I got to meet the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Louis Bruce, and I told him, I said, I never have read a good thing about you. And I'm not a fool, I don't think. I'm sure that there are some things about the Bureau of Indian Affairs that aren't really terrible, aren't really like they were described in Our Brother's Keeper, and like Vine Deloria says they are. I know that that's not true. I know that the story's it's only about half true. So then he started telling me about this new program, which Jim touched on, his new policies, and how he is really going to try to make the Bureau of Indian Affairs an organization that will really do what it's supposed to do for once and for good. He said it wasn't going to be an easy job, And one of the big problems, he told me all about it. They gave me a sort of a sneak preview of the new policies. And he told me that one of the big problems is going to be communicating this new program to Indian people. Well, I sort of fancy myself as being able to communicate with Indians to a certain level. So somehow it was worked out that I would come to the Bureau of Indian Affairs to work primarily on this program and to do whatever else might come along. And I have been acting as a special assistant to the commissioner on that. But I told the commissioner when I went there that I wasn't going to start trying to peddle BIA falsehoods, lies, and things like that, because I just couldn't do it. And he told me that he didn't think that that would be necessary, that he was going to try to really change BIA. And I thought that, I figured that here was my opportunity to see if I could go into the BIA and do something possibly to help change it, to get Indian people to better understand what is going on with BIA, especially with the whole new picture that's developing in Washington and out in the field with the BIA. Here is an opportunity for me to accept a challenge, to quit griping and complaining and screaming and yelling, and to really go in, and it's sort of like being called to the Christian service or something. Here's my chance. But that's how I took it, and that's what I'm doing with the Bureau now. And when I say, I'm trying to avoid using that term public relations, because people always sort of giggle whenever I say public relations for the BIA. But I do that, but it's primarily with Indian people, and it's primarily a communications process that we're developing with Indians, and we're talking with Indian people constantly. We've been all over the country, and I've known Indian people for a very long time. And there is a special way of communicating with Indians that a lot of non-Indians just have no idea what it's all about. And Indians understand things in certain terms, in certain fashions, in certain ways, certain words that would mean something entirely different to you. And you just have to know this, and you have to be an Indian to feel it and understand it and appreciate it. So I'm trying to work all of that into the thing too. In addition to getting publicity like for the new programs where it counts, like in Washington with the Washington Post, the New York Times, all the big papers, trying to get them favorably to support the efforts of the commissioner, which I believe are good, so that people like in the White House read it, in the Department of the Interior read it, you read it, everybody that reads it, everybody reads it that can write to a congressman, that sort of thing, saying that it's a good program, and it's worked out fairly well up to now. The problem, as Jim said now, is not the problem, but the situation now has come to the point where it's now up to the Indian people to decide if they want to take this opportunity that has been given to them. And I say given, and that sounds sort of condescending, given from you white people. Well, you know, that's a sad kind of irony given to them. But that's exactly what it comes down to in hard, cold political facts. Washington has said, here's the new program. It come down from the president, and it trickles down to the BIA. It's given to the Indians. All right, so they have an opportunity, and they have a chance, all the rhetoric and sadness aside. And it's now up to them to see if they want to come through with what they've been asking for a long time. If they really want to try to change things for them. And the BIA stands ready, I think, at last, to start changing itself. It's on the verge of a metamorphosis process of changing itself, so that finally Indian people can run it, or will ultimately run it, and will be able to spend what money there is for BIA as they want it. Their individual tribes need it, and onward. And the door is open, I think, now, for once, and finally, for the Indian people to really get down to the work of helping themselves get out of the scene that they're in right now. And the reason I'm at BIA is because I think that I can help a little to do that. And if it doesn't work out, I can always go to work somewhere else. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
This table wasn't set up for a panel today. It was for tomorrow, by the way, and this was supposed to be just a presentation, though these people are very willing to answer questions if you have them at the present time. Okay, there is
There's
coffee in the back. We break at any time for that. Let's see, there are questions.
Gigamal. Gigamal. Yeah. I will gladly accept the label sellout, Uncle Tomahawk, Uncle Tom Tom, anything you want to call me, just as long as I have.
Yes, I'll repeat the questions if I can. The question was, do these people consider themselves Uncle Tomahawks as Indians on the reservations do consider members of the BIA?
Personally, I don't give a damn what you call me or what they call me, as long as I have the opportunity to try to get done what I have agreed with myself and the Commissioner of Indian Affairs to try to do with the BIA and the Indian people. And my friend Lehman Brightman, who's coming here tonight, has called me a sellout, much more bombastically than saying you're a sellout. It's much worse than that. And my friends in National Indian Youth Council have called me that. Apples, radishes, anything. I don't care. I really thought about that whenever I made my decision to try to go aboard BIA and see how it is on that side. And so personally, they can call me anything they want to, except what my incorrect tribe. What Jim wants to say about that.
Well, I learned a long time ago. Is this thing on?
Yeah, you're on.
I learned a long time ago that if you worry about what people are going to call you or what they think about you as an individual when you're trying to do a job that needs to be done, you're never going to get the job done. So I learned a long time ago that, people are going to call you names, they're going to accuse you of this and that and so forth. But if you're really conscientious and interested in improving the social and economic conditions that exist on these reservations, there's no need to worry about whatever you're called. And the only thing that I can say is that people who are doing things very often are criticized. People who don't do things, you don't hear about, pro or con.
Let me ask you a question. Are you impressed when you hear some Indian shout at another Indian, you apple, you radish, you tomato? Or does that impress you? What does it make you think? Or insecure, maybe, something like that. Yeah. I'm not trying to lead you into that answer, but I just wonder. Yeah, sure. I still am. Yeah, I'm still the editor of Americans Before Columbus.
The question is relative to the Red Muslims.
I don't know if I don't think there's an actual organization called the Red Muslims. It's
No, there isn't an organization, but you might be interested in knowing that the commissioner, Mr. Bruce, has brought in at the executive level 20 people. Of the 20, there's 15 of us who are Indians, and we've been labeled different things, among which is Red Muslims, Bruce's Braves, Bruce's Young Bucks, Bruce's Militants, Bruce's NIYC Kids, and so forth. So it seems like even we who are in the Bureau and who are trying to initiate changes are being classified in terms of the so-called Red Power movement. But I think that as far as we are concerned, we're working towards those same things from the inside, where they're pointing out the deficiencies from the outside, and we're trying to address ourselves to these deficiencies from the inside.
It's really funny that thing about being on the outside looking on the outside, or the inside, or being on the inside looking outside. It's a different. Once that's happened to you, once you're out of school or something, and you get into that kind of situation, it's really strange. You feel from having been on the outside
hammering so long. Then all of a sudden you're way on the inside, sort of at the top or near the top, and you see things entirely differently. It's an experience. You just got to keep it in perspective.
Yes?
Seems to me that part of the Red Power movement is an effort to maintain the Indian culture. What do you think of this goal? How realistic do you think it is, and how much is the BIA doing it?
Well, I think any individual who is interested in retaining his culture needs to practice it himself. I come from a reservation. I speak my own language. I participate in all of the activities that take place on the reservation with regard to social as well as Indian religious activities and so forth. I am proud to say that I'm Indian. I don't have to go around telling people that I am an Indian, that I practice my religion and so forth. I kind of wonder about people who talk about retaining culture and so forth as to what extent they themselves practice and or preach or conduct activities that would promote the retention of culture within the tribes. Even Indian leadership talks about retaining culture, but I don't see any organized activity on the part of Indian leadership in terms of sitting down young children, young adults, and so forth, and trying to teach them our way of life or our language and so forth. So, until I have seen an organized program where these activities are going to be conducted by Indian leaders, by advocates of retention of Indian culture and so forth, then I'll believe it. In the meantime, I am an Indian. When I come out here to meet with you folks, I'm on a competitive basis with you people. When I go back on a reservation, I'm an Indian, I speak Indian, I communicate with my people at their level, and I do things their style. And to me, living in one culture and being able to operate in another culture is simply like walking through that door. And on one hand, I'm an Indian in one room, I go through that door, I have to be able to manage myself in the competitive style and lifestyle of the dominant culture, and which I'm willing to do.
Yeah, I'll try to answer give my. First of all, just a while ago I was asked, what am I doing with the suit on? Why am I not wearing blue jeans or something like that? Well, I think I can wear anything I want to, anytime I want to, and it just depends on me. I don't think that my wearing blue jeans or a G-string or anything up here would make me look more Indian. I just don't think that. Sometimes if I go to a powwow, maybe I'll dress a little more loosely. I wouldn't wear a suit to a powwow. And I'm not wearing a suit because I'm trying to impress you people, because I have no interest really in doing that. But I don't think that you have, I agree with Jim, I don't think that wearing beads and Indian power buttons and that sort of thing is preserving culture. I do think, though, that a definite effort is needed, a much more serious effort is needed on the part of the Indian people to preserve their culture. I do think that the Indian culture is really dying at a more rapid rate than a lot of people realize. It's really sad to go some places and see just what a terrible state the Indian culture, or the culture as we have sort of had it textbook to us, the condition that it's in. One of the things that I'm involved in, I was telling you a while ago about my plaything, some of my friends and I are right now working on the establishment of an American Indian theater ensemble, and to be set up in New York City on the 1st of March, which a consortium of foundations is funding, to do plays and entertainments for and about Indians, and all Indian acted, all Indian performed, staged and everything, to be done on reservations in urban